feels good to be back with you for another day as we are continuing on through our Bible study in the book of Nehemiah, brought to you by Christ Table. If you'd like to find out more about Christ Table, right there is where you should head over to www.christtable.today. We would love to have you sign up for our email list there so that you can find out and keep up to date on all the things that are happening at Christ Table, which this Bible study is one part of. There are lots of other things that go on at Christ Table, which we'd love to have you join us along the journey with. You can also donate there. Encourage you to donate if you find this helpful to you, or if you would like to make sure that this Bible study and all of the work at Christ Table continues for other people who are in spiritual need, then please make a donation. And our regular donors, every couple of months, we send a box through the mail. We're working on the holiday one. It includes spiritual resources, a Bible study, a book, other gifts, and we just send that free to all of our regular donors just because we want to model generosity as well. If you'd like to be a part of this Bible study, you can join us on the journey by visiting that URL right there at the bottom of the screen, go.christtable.today/reconstruct. You'll find the reading schedule for all of the study, and you can go back into the archive on Facebook, Twitch, YouTube, wherever you are watching this, and join us through the entirety of the study if you'd like to be a part of it. We're coming close to the end, and we are somewhere in the messy middle of it, but we're grateful. I'm grateful that you are along for the journey. So today we find ourselves in the second half of a long slog through a list of names and places in Nehemiah chapter 11, verses 25 through 36. So let's dig in. I'm glad you're here with us along for the journey this morning. As I have said several times through this journey of Nehemiah, whenever we come to a long list of names or places or genealogies, it is perfectly acceptable for you to skip those and move on. The truth of the matter is, surprisingly, though we may not get any doctrine or spiritual formation tools that are helpful to us out of those lists of genealogies and places and names, we do get a lot of helpful information out of those things as to what's going on. Specifically, sometimes what we get out of those lists, as we do today, is the mindset. It tells us a lot about what they feel was important to record and what they feel is important to ignore. Maybe, for example, in your life, what financial records you keep and what financial records you don't keep says a lot about what you value, which family events you take photographs of, and which family events or things, milestones in life that you don't take pictures of tells a lot about what you value. Maybe the pieces from your past, the things that you hold on to. If I were to take a walk through your house and would ask you to tell the stories behind the items that are there, it would tell me a lot about you in the things that you have kept and held on to and display, and also the things that you have let go and not held on to tell a story as well. When we come to Nehemiah chapter 11 here in verses 25 through 36, we should probably keep that in mind because it's going to be a part of helping us understand a little bit of the mindset of the Israelites here in Judea. So, as for the surrounding villages with their open fields, some of the people of Judah lived, and we're now going to get a list of a whole bunch of cities here. Kiriath Arba with its settlements, Dibon with its settlements, Jabzeel with its villages. They also lived in Yeshua, Molada, Beth Pelet, Hazar-Shul, Beersheba with its settlements, Ziklag and Mechanoah with its settlements. Verse 29, they also lived in En-Rimmon, Zorah, Jarmoth, Zanoah, and Adullam with their surrounding villages. They also lived in Lachish with its nearby fields. You getting the picture of what's going on here yet? We're almost done. And Azekah with its surrounding villages. So the people of Judah were living all the way from Beersheba in the south to the valley of Hinnom. Some of the people of Benjamin lived at Geba, Michmash, Asia, and Bethel with its settlements. They also lived in Antoth, Nob, Anaya, Hadazur, Ramah, Gileam, Hadid, Zebum, Neblah, Lod, Ano, and the valley of craftsmen. Some of the Levites who lived in Judah were sent to live with the tribe of Benjamin. And now we come to the list of names and places having ended, and you're thinking, what in the world am I supposed to, if anything, and can I get out of that? Well, first of all, why don't we try and understand what we just read? And maybe this is helpful for you. It was helpful for me. What we had there in the first few verses of our reading, the first half there, is essentially a plotted map of villages of the people of Judah. And so if we were to pull out those names of the cities and villages and settlements that we just read and were to put them on a map, that would be what we're looking at here. Now, this is the area of what we would call modern-day Israel in the Middle East. There is a body of water there just off to the right of the middle that is the Dead Sea. And you can see over on the left, in the upper left corner, is the Mediterranean Sea. And there are the cities, or the villages, I guess, and settlements of the people of Judah. Now, in the final portion of our reading, that last verse 31, I think, to 36 or so, it listed out the villages of the people of Benjamin. So the villages of Judah, and then specifically called out the villages and the settlements of the people of Benjamin. And so when we pull all of this information together, what we have essentially is a look at the area that was settled by the people of Judea, or Judah. Now, when we take all of this, what we see is that there seems to be an indication that there were a large number of people who were living in these areas. There's kind of the assumption, unless you take villages and settlements to mean small. And also it kind of communicates or gives the perception that the area that was under their control was rather broad. So if you were to say the boundaries of the area that the people had settled and were now involved in maintaining would be a very large area. The difficulty with that is it just really isn't true. It's, we used to say whenever pastors would tell the number of people who came to an event or to a service, we would say that they were evangelizing the numbers. They were kind of ginning up the numbers in order to make them larger than they actually were. Politicians oftentimes do that today. Tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands came to this rally. It was maybe 1,000 or 2,000. It kind of is the similar thing that we see happening here in this text is something that is exaggeration, maybe bordering on not being true. The impression that we walk away with is that they were maintaining a very large area of people of land and were in control of a very large area. That's really not necessarily true. In fact, it isn't true at all. They barely had control of the primary city, the capital of Jerusalem. As we know from what we just read, nobody was even living in the primary city, the capital of Jerusalem. And so the exaggeration of truth is never really a good look. It's not a good thing. It's not a great idea. Why do they do that? I think that the easiest answer the simplest answer is most often the right answer, and I think that that's probably what's going on here is they have painted a picture that sets their boundaries and their land where the boundaries and the land were pre-captivity. So they are living in the past rather than living in the present. It would be as though the world is crumbling around you, but you're still trying to give the impression that everything's okay, that everything's all right, though the house is burning down. They'll never really return to those glory days of the past. They can't go back and live in those glory days. They can't even then recreate those boundaries. They will never be fully autonomous in the way they were before. They will, as we know, here in a few hundred years, move to being under Roman rule from Persian rule. The great Israel as it once was will not be anytime soon, and yet they're living in those glory days and in many ways kind of pretending as though things are the way that they were. Now, it's difficult really for us to push back too much against that after what they've been through. Who can blame them for wanting to go back and live in the past and dream, and in fact maybe even try to convince themselves that things are not necessarily as bad as they are when they compare to the past. We do this today. I see churches do this all of the time, especially post-COVID. Churches went through a very difficult time during COVID, and almost every church out there, the measures that they would have said were how they gauge success pre-COVID versus post-COVID: attendance, involvement, giving, children and youth. The metrics that many churches would use to measure success pre-COVID were much better days than post-COVID. And pre-COVID, churches, especially in evangelicalism, weren't doing well anyway in comparison to 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. It's been a slow slide. COVID advanced quickly the trajectory in a negative way of that slide. So what did churches tend to typically do, or what do they tend to typically do whenever they realize that their metrics are headed in the wrong direction? Well, they say, what has worked? And they'll go back in the past into the archives and say, well, 20 years ago or 30 years ago, we were doing this thing and we were doing that thing and we were doing this thing, and so it worked then. It surely will work now. And so rather than do new things, they return to old things, and that is always a death wish. You cannot resurrect or relive the past. Now, as a consultant, the truth of the matter is, between you and me, that the things that were working in the past usually weren't the things that were working in the past to create that. There's this delayed reality that happens where whenever something is done that triggers growth or triggers new energy, it's a lagging indicator. And so it's probably something that they were doing 5 or 10 years earlier that isn't getting the credit for the growth that they were seeing at the point where they were seeing it. So they thought it was these things that were causing the growth, but actually it was probably things that they had done years earlier that they were not seeing as being the case. But all of that to say, essentially, you can't go back and resurrect things from the past in order to try to fix present problems. But churches are notorious for doing that, and this is essentially what's going on here in Nehemiah as well. They continue to dip back into the past to try to create present and future glory and success. This is the wall. This is returning back to the ways in which they divvied people up and categorized people and knew who was in and who was out. And God has already said, that's not the way I want you to do things. And yet they're still trying to do it that way. And this passage is a very strong indicator of them trying to relive and resurrect the old glory days of Judah and the amount of land and the amount of control and the amount of autonomy that we had then, and kind of pretend as though a few people who are living in these areas means that things were the way that they were. And that's just not the way that it was. In fact, Jesus, a few centuries later in Mark chapter 2, is going to say, no one puts new wine into old wineskins, for the wine would burst the wineskins, and the wine and the skins would both be lost. New wine calls for new wineskins. New times call for new things. New problems call for new solutions. Old mousetraps don't catch new mice. You can't put new wine into an old wineskin. God is doing a new thing in your time, in this time, in the present. What new thing is God calling you to do to address those issues and problems in order for there to be spiritual transformation in yourself, in your home, in your family, in your workplace, in your school, in your church, in all of your communities and neighborhoods and spheres of influence? What new things is God calling you to? It's not going to look like the past anymore. You can't resurrect that family that was. You can't resurrect that job that you once had. You can't resurrect and bring back to life the way you were and things were 20 or 30 years ago. You have to accept the reality of the present and find new ways to make this season, this time, sacred, holy, wonderful. Don't try to solve new problems with old solutions. Or like Nehemiah and the people did here, don't live in the past. Accept the present reality, deal with it emotionally, move on, and see what good can come from that new day.